Hey there, Dr. Anna Maria Helt, herbalist and microbiologist, along with Dr. Milo. Welcome to episode 9 of Monday's Mushrooms. This week we're getting into all things morel. And the reason is because it's springtime here in the Rockies. And morels are some of the earlier edible mushrooms to show up in the wild here. Oyster mushrooms are also coming out this time of year. But this week we're going to talk about morels. So here we go. And as usual, if you have any comments or questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments section and I will reply. Here goes. There are a bajillion species of morels around the globe, and they're all under the genus name Morchella, Morchella, which is reminiscent of maybe an Addams Family cousin. Here where I am in the Rockies, and actually in multiple parts of North America, we have Morchella esculentoides. See if you can spot it in this picture here. Lovely photo taken by Mushroom Geek, mycologist Michael Kuo. If you can't find it, it's in the lower right quadrant of the photo, and here is another beautiful photo of the golden morel. Now, when you look in older guidebooks, the golden morel in United States will often be referenced as Morchella esculenta, which is a European species, as it turns out, based on sequencing. So what we have here, especially again in the Rockies where I am, is not Morchella esculenta, but Morchella esculentoides, meaning that it's somewhat like Morchella esculenta. So this is known also as the golden morel, the American golden morel, the yellow morel. And you can actually grow golden morel. So there are kits available for Morchella esculenta that are outdoor growing kits. So I'm trying that, and we'll see if I actually wind up getting any of these this spring. I'll be super excited if it actually works and the dogs haven't peed on them to death at the base of the trees here in the yard. So here is another shot here of golden morels that have been harvested. And the reason I'm showing you this is for some of the identifying characteristics of morels. But I just want to pause and mention we have multiple species of black morels. Morchella brunea, Morchella septimulata, Morchella caibabensis, Morchella tomentosa here in the southern Rockies, and additional ones. But coming back to morel identification, when you take a look here, you're going to see a hollow stalk. And in fact, if I go forward one more, you're going to see that the whole mushroom's hollow. If you bisect the mushroom, the cap and the stalk are hollow. The cap consists of these distinctive ridges with pits, so a ridge and pit, and the color of the ridge can be a different color than that of the pit, as you're especially seeing in this middle one here, where the ridges are a little lighter and the pits have gotten darker as that fruiting body has aged. Another distinguishing characteristic here that is also shared with black morels is that the cap margins are fused directly to the top of the stalk. If you're a mushroom nerd, you might typically think of mushrooms as being more umbrella shaped, kind of like the ubiquitous portobello mushroom you see in the grocery store, where the margin of the cap is not fused to the stalk, it sticks out. In this case, the edge of the cap is fused to the stalk. So a distinguishing characteristic of morels that can help save you from inadvertently harvesting morel lookalikes. So, and then here is a picture of one of our local black morels, Morchella brunea, and some other black morels where you can really see that pit and ridge structure. My dear friend Ruthie harvested these and gave them to me. And again, if you look at where they've been chopped, you can see that it's hollow, or at least you can see that the stalk is hollow. And here they are cooked. So I'm going to go back and talk about goldens again. Here's a beautiful golden. So these show up first in my area generally by about mid-May, but sometimes as soon as late April if it's warm enough and we've gotten rain. Now, they will not show up at all until the ground temperature reaches about 50 degrees. Not 48 degrees, not 48 and a half degrees, 50 degrees. And then they will start showing up. And that's 50 degrees F, by the way. This usually happens when daytime temperatures are consistently around 60 degrees and up, and nighttime temperatures are hitting about 40 degrees and up. Lilacs will be blooming around here Oregon grape, Mahonia repens is the other name for that plant, will be blooming. So some other indicators that it might be time, if you are in the Southern Rockies, to start going out and looking for morels. So goldens, most often mid to late May, but again, late April at lower elevation is possible. And so these can be found from about 4,500 feet elevation and up. Now, black morels are going to come out a bit later in the season, but still late May going into June. And for both golden and black morels, if you go up in elevation as the season progresses, you may find new blooms or new fruiting, essentially. Although this is not a go all summer into September genus of mushrooms. Now, black morels you're more likely to find about 7,000 feet and up. Both black and golden morels in this area, you will find them in wetter microhabitats. So, when you're in the spot where you want to be looking, look for depressions in the ground, kind of lowerings where water will hang out a little longer after a rain. Look by logs that will trap some moisture, by larger rocks along streams. That will improve your odds of finding morels. Now, goldens you're going to find amongst cottonwood trees. So those are in this area kind of somewhat lower elevation trees. I see them at 8,500 feet and such, but also lower. And you'll find them around box elder trees. You'll find them in old orchards. And then with our local black morel species, you'll tend to find them in our higher elevation forests. So mixed aspen conifer, for instance, lodgepole pine, spruce, I believe Doug fir as well. And again, look for microhabitats. Now, a number of species of our black morels are so-called burners. This means that they will show up after a wildfire. So the year after a wildfire, these can profusely fruit. And even a couple years later, you may find these. And I actually tried to locate some of these because we had a small fire a couple years ago near Purgatory Ski Resort. And the next year I was out on the forest roads back there, like, all right, where was that burn? And I couldn't find it. I was annoyed, but I was hoping to get lucky and score some morels. So these are the burners. They show up after a fire. Now, you're not going to find them in an area that's just been completely torched by the fire, where all the trees are dead and black and the ground is black. Where you want to look is where there are islands of living trees in the burn area, or if there is, say, a ring of living trees kind of around the burn area, that's the spot to look for your burner morels. Now, not all black morels are burn morels. Like this one here, Morchella brunea, does not need a wildfire to trigger it to fruit. So there you go, golden and black morels in the Southern Rockies. Just a quick overview. But before getting into the medicinal qualities, I want to just pause and say these are very cherished edibles amongst us mushroom aficionados. You can even sometimes find dried morels commercially available in the grocery store, and they cost a fortune. They need to be cooked before you eat them or you use them for medicine. They are toxic when they're not cooked. Morels are toxic when they're not cooked. They can cause severe gastrointestinal distress. They can have unwanted effects on nervous system related stuff and cause a variety of symptoms related to that unpleasant stuff. Now, generally the symptoms and the reaction to morels is self-limiting, but again, unpleasant. And some people even react to cooked morels. So just be aware, if you've never eaten them before, cook them and try just a little bit at first. Also, some people, when eating cooked morels together with some alcohol, can also have a reaction. I've not experienced that personally. It hasn't been an issue, but there are reports of that. Now, getting into the medicine, energetically speaking, say from a traditional Chinese standpoint, they are considered cold in energetics, and they're also sweet in terms of their flavor. When something is considered sweet, it generally means it's going to have tonifying properties in the body, building supportive properties in general, kind of general supportive building properties to help you be healthier. Cold is, again, an energetic. If you happen to be a really cold-bodied person, you need to wear a bunch of layers when you go to bed and have a stack of blankets on you, and you're like me, living in socks 24 hours a day. You don't really want to eat tons and tons of morels all the time because they won't fit with your constitution. Or you want to spice them up maybe and do a stir fry with ginger. You shouldn't really be eating tons and tons of them at a time anyway, and with wild mushrooms in general, and see how you react. Yeah, you have more likelihood of running into negative effects if you're being a glutton. Sometimes it's hard not to be though. So very high in protein and zinc and iron and copper and other nutrients and minerals. Widespread use around the world for medicine. Milo wanted to come back and help some more, so here he is. Back to the medicine, very widespread global use, like I just said. Everywhere where they grow, there seems to be a history of not just food use, but medicinal use. So, for instance, both black morels and golden morels have been used for digestive support. For example, in traditional Chinese medicine, they were used for stomach and spleen qi support. What this basically means is they improve the stomach's ability to break down our food. And in Chinese medicine, the spleen is about nutrient assimilation and transportation around the body, different than the Western concept of spleen. But in Chinese medicine, morels are thought to improve that function of the spleen, meaning improving nutrient assimilation and transport throughout the body. The spleen in Chinese medicine is also related to fluid transport around the body, so presumably morels would be useful for supporting that spleen function as well. So both blacks and goldens have also been used as a laxative. And really, if you eat any wild mushrooms in enough quantity, you're going to find that most of them have that activity. They do have a decent amount of fiber in them, for instance. Now, golden and black morels have a history of being used for things like weakness and fatigue. And that comes back to that sweet flavor, which traditionally speaking is thought to be tonifying, to act as a tonic. Morels have been traditionally used for shortness of breath, for anemia. They do have iron in them. In fact, along with other useful nutrients. They've traditionally been used for support with heart disease and blood lipid regulation. That's actually true for a lot of mushrooms. A lot of even edible mushrooms that you get at the grocery store can benefit our cardiovascular system, healthy food. Both black species and golden species of morels in different parts of the globe have been used for arthritis and pain as well, and as a brain tonic. So these are just some of the most widespread uses that are shared across cultures and on different continents. There are many, many other uses that have been noted in the ethnomycological record, and even now with practicing contemporary herbalists that I'm not getting into because there's so many of them. I chose to just name a few things that are around the globe. So history of use here in various indigenous cultures in North America, multiple First Nation cultures up in what's now British Columbia, use in India, in Pakistan, in the Himalayas, in China, Japan, Malaysia, and elsewhere. And it's always fun to see similar uses for different species of these mushrooms. It makes me wonder how similar the chemistry is, or how different the chemistry is, but why these same uses are coming out of the Morchella genus, even though there are many different species in the genus. I find interesting. But it may simply be due to just underlying chemistry shared amongst multiple mushrooms, multiple edible and medicinal mushrooms. And I've talked about this before, where all mushrooms tested have various anti-inflammatory properties or antioxidant properties, or immune strengthening properties, and blah, 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 blah. So it could just be the general chemistry that a lot of different mushrooms share, being the reason why we see similar uses here, not only amongst different species of morels, but amongst different genera of mushrooms being used for heart health, for instance, or digestive health. But I'm going off on a tangent now. So some research tidbits. There's been a decent amount of research done on these mushrooms, mostly test tube studies and cell culture studies, rodent studies, but there was a mouse study where morels were found to, polysaccharides from golden morels were found to boost immunity in those mice, in old mice in particular, where the immune system is starting to deteriorate, and also improved antioxidant systems in those old mice. And then a study showing liver protective effects of golden morels as well. And again, there are a lot of other little studies out there looking at different species of morels and trying to get a sense of what, from a scientific perspective, some of these medicinal properties may be. As I always say, when I'm practicing, I look to tradition, because that is decades, centuries, millennia of use and observation going into that. But I do like to see what the research science has to say as well. Now, Morchella esculenta, the European golden morel, is becoming depleted in certain parts of the world, and that seems to be largely from deforestation. They are popular mushrooms, so they can get over-harvested, but it seems like habitat loss is the big theme there. One can culture golden morel mushrooms, and in fact, I've stuck some out in the yard where I'm living at the moment, under a few of the trees here, to see if I can get them to grow. And by some, I meant a growing kit that somebody gifted me. And so we'll see, fingers crossed. Outdoor growing kits are available. I'm gonna put this guy down. Outdoor growing kits are available for goldens. I've not seen that for black morels. And this gets into the growth or the lifestyle of these mushrooms, which I'm not going to get into that much, but I just want to mention that it seems to be pretty complex. At least for the golden morels, it seems like for part of their life cycle, they're saprophytes, which means they simply live on dead and dying organic matter that's in the ground, in the soil. But it might be that part of their lifestyle is mycorrhizal, where they're having to live in association with the roots of a plant, of a tree. And that hasn't been entirely sussed out yet. But the fact that there is a saprobic or saprophytic stage in the lifestyle of golden morels is why we can grow them in culture, or in the yard, without having to have a certain kind of tree there that they need to hook up with. So I want to just point out some lookalikes that some people have confused for morels out in the woods. What you're looking at here is Gyrometra esculenta, or the false morel, also known as the beefsteak mushroom. It is mistaken for morels because of the lighter colored, funky looking stalk and the wavy cap. But if you're paying attention, you'll notice that this cap actually does look quite a bit different than a cap of a morel. A morel will have those pits and ridges that I've talked about, and they'll even be more or less in line on the cap of a black morel. And here the cap is more wavy, wrinkled, not so much defined pit and ridge structures. The cap color can vary a little bit, but it still is, at least relatively speaking, a little bit more monochromatic than the cap of some morels, where the ridges can be a different color than the pits. Another distinguishing feature of Gyrometra is that it is not completely hollow inside the way that morels are hollow inside. So here is a really cool drawing from 1906 diagramming a bisected Gyrometra mushroom, and you can see that, yeah, there's some hollow areas there, but it's very different than if you cut a morel in half. Now, the reason that this mushroom is a problem is that it contains a toxin known as gyrometrin, from which the genus name is derived. Gyrometrin is metabolized to rocket fuel, quite literally. Monomethylhydrazine is the toxic metabolic product of gyrometrin, and this can cause vomiting and dizziness, vertigo, seizures, convulsions. It can induce a coma and even kill people. And in fact, people eating this so-called false morel have died. That said, people do eat it deliberately. One of its names is beefsteak mushroom. This is true in parts of Eastern Europe. This is even true in North America, where people will eat this either accidentally or on purpose. But I do not recommend it. It is a toxic mushroom. It does have rocket fuel in it. And so it's best to avoid it. But there's so many other delicious edibles. Why risk it? Now, here is another possible source of confusion. This is Verpa bohemica. It is a or Bohemia, no, Bohemica. This is a look-alike because it's got that kind of wrinkly cap thing going on. The cap's somewhat conical shape, or actually quite conical shape here. But if you're paying attention, you're already spotting some differences. I already told you that in Morels, the edge of the cap is fused directly to the top of the stalk. What you're seeing here with Verpa is the edge of the cap is hanging over the stalk, hanging down around the stalk. So especially look at the little one in the lower right that's been bisected. You'll see the cap margins down almost as far as the base of the stalk. So very different structure, in fact, than Morels. And even when you look at the cap itself, the surface is not quite as organized, I would say, as Morels in terms of those pits and ridges. This is wavy and has ridges, but they're not quite as structured and organized as those pits and ridges on the surface of a Morel. So a couple distinguishing characteristics. Now, there actually is some controversy as to the edibility of Verpa, and in fact, one of its common names is early Morels. If you look at guidebooks in North America, they will have this listed as toxic, and in fact, very respected mushroom fellow and toxicologist Michael Bugh says that, I quote, "It's edible for some but poisonous to many others, causing variable reactions, including severe gastrointestinal upset and temporary loss of coordination." Unquote. So these are very similar symptoms that people can get from eating undercooked or raw morels, or just being an unlucky person who has a bad reaction to morel. So that's kind of interesting. However, if you look in European guidebooks, especially Italian, you will see this listed as an edible and favored species. I had just read a paper from the spring 2015 issue of Fungi. The authors are Davoli and Sitta, and they talk about this being a long eaten or having a long tradition of this being an edible mushroom in Italy. So there's a little controversy going on here in terms of whether or not to eat these. I have zero experience with harvesting Verpa, so I can't really give you my 2 cents there. Again, the symptoms that have been ascribed to this mushroom in terms of GI toxicity, nervous system stuff, are similar to what we know from Morels. Now, one of the things why I'm being maybe a little more cautious and not just saying go out and eat it, despite the Italian and European tradition of eating Verpa, is that what we have here in North America may or may not be what they have there in Europe, even if they're both called Verpa bohemica. What we're finding with more and more DNA analyses being done on mushrooms that are called the same species, we're finding that what we have here in North America are in fact frequently not the same exact species as what they have in Europe. So I don't know whether or not that is the case with Verpa, or if people are even doing that research right now. But there is the possibility that maybe there is some difference in chemistry between those that folks eat there and those that are here. But really, I have zero idea, no idea. I would suggest you go look up the paper that I cited. Fungi, spring 2015 issue, Davoli and Sitta, or it might be Davoli. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing their name. Now, another mushroom that can sometimes be confused with Morels is the stinkhorn mushroom here, Phallus imputicus, and you can maybe guess why it has that botanical name. And the reason people might confuse this mushroom is because of the cap structure, the ridges and little pit things there. But this mushroom really stinks, hence its name. So the slimy stuff you're seeing on the cap is the green spore mass called the gleba. It stinks, so it lures in flies and other insects that like stinky things so that they can spread these spores around. And this mushroom in its immature form is actually a prized edible in some parts of the world, so when it's in its so-called egg form. But if you got a whiff of the mature fruiting body, I don't know why you would want to pick it and stick it in your basket to take it home, unless the spore mass has been completely stripped bare by insects. It's going to reek. But some people do actually mistake this for a morel, even if it doesn't really fruit at the same time that I think, at least where I am. Cut this sucker in half, really look at it, look at the cap structure, and you'll see that it's not a Morel. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out my website, which is listed in the comments section, for upcoming classes, upcoming workshops if you have to be local, but I do a lot of online teaching, and about a dozen years of free articles and videos on herbs, mushrooms, and such. Take care, everybody.